I thought it was just a harmless joke, but a single comment about my brother-in-law's past sparked a confrontation I never saw coming. My wife won't talk to me, and the tension in the house is suffocating. Sometimes honesty comes at a cost, and family secrets are far more dangerous than I ever imagined. Stick around, this is the story of shame, loyalty, and the delicate line between truth and love. Asterisk, I remember the first time I really noticed the weight of family secrets. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the suburban streets hum softly under the fading orange glow of the streetlights. My wife, Emily, was flipping through her phone, searching for ideas on party decorations. The aroma of coffee lingered from the cup I had abandoned earlier, and I leaned back in my chair, pretending to be relaxed, but inside, I was bracing myself for something I didn't yet understand. Emily is 27, smart, intuitive, and fiercely protective of her family. I've known her since 2018, but in that moment, I felt a subtle tension that only years of shared life can reveal. Our apartment was modest, cozy, a reflection of our young adulthood, but the walls carried echoes of stories far older than us. Her parents were visiting, as they often did, filling our home with the comforting chaos of family. But there was always an undertone, a shadow that hovered just beyond the corners of the living room. Her older brother, Alex, 31, charming in his own way, but reckless, careless, a man who had made mistakes that the town had not forgotten. Alex had been caught last year attempting something foolish, something criminal. The story had gone viral in our small town, thanks to a surveillance camera that caught every moment. I had seen the video once, and it left a mark on me, not just because of the act, but because of the ripple effects it caused. Emily's parents had moved in with us shortly after, seeking refuge from the judgmental whispers and subtle mockery that seemed to follow them wherever they went. I could see it in her father's eyes, the lingering embarrassment, the unspoken apology for a son who had tarnished the family name. Her mother tried to keep a neutral expression, but there was a quiet resignation in the way she arranged the furniture, always careful, always correcting. Perhaps as if by controlling small things, she could contain the chaos that had invaded their lives. And there I was, 32, caught in the middle. A husband who wanted to love his wife, respect her family, but also be honest with the reality that had already happened. I often found myself walking the tightrope between humor and discomfort, between candidness and tact. That night, as Emily scrolled through her phone for the perfect banner, the idea sprang into my mind, one of those thoughts that felt harmless at first, yet carried the potential for disaster. I smirked and said, "Hey, why don't we keep the theme decorator? It might suit your brother perfectly." It was meant as a joke, a fleeting, ridiculous quip, but the room went silent, and I could see the blood drain from Emily's face. She turned sharply, her eyes narrowing, and in that instant, I realized that some jokes are too close to home. Some truths, or in my case, playful exaggerations, touch wounds that haven't healed. I didn't know it then, but this moment, this single comment was the spark that would ignite one of the most intense arguments I had ever faced. And in the weeks to come, I would learn more about loyalty, shame, and the fragile line between honesty and compassion than I ever thought possible. Asterisk. Living with Emily's parents had its own rhythm, one I had never experienced before. On the surface, it seemed normal people eating breakfast, talking about the weather, watching television, but there was an invisible layer to everything. Every glance, every half laugh carried weight, a judgment, perhaps unspoken, a memory of Alex's mistakes that hung like smoke in the air. In the mornings, I would make coffee, always careful not to spill a drop, because it felt like every minor action was under scrutiny. Emily's father, Mr. Thompson, would sit at the table reading the paper, eyes occasionally flicking toward me, evaluating, calculating, as if to measure my ability to endure living in a house shadowed by shame. Her mother, Mrs. Thompson, was quieter but no less tense. She moved with precision, straightening cushions, adjusting the curtain so that sunlight fell perfectly on the floor. The kind of meticulous behavior that spoke volumes about her need for control when so much of her world had been chaotic. I learned quickly to navigate the minefield of subtle judgment. Conversations about Alex were always carefully avoided, yet constantly hovering in the background. The town's gossip was merciless. At the grocery store, the clerk would raise an eyebrow when she noticed Mrs. Thompson's presence. Neighbors would smile too widely, their tone just a little too saccharine, hinting that they knew something you didn't want to acknowledge. Sometimes, I would catch Emily staring out the window late at night, her eyes distant. I knew she was thinking about Alex, about the past, about the whispers that had followed her family. She had forgiven him in her way, had moved past the fear and humiliation, but I knew that part of her still bore the weight of that shame. And me, I felt like a visitor in a home where history had etched itself into every corner, where I had to tiptoe carefully around memories and emotions that were not entirely mine. There were moments that felt almost normal, fleeting glimpses of laughter over dinner or shared jokes about trivial things. But even those were punctuated by a tension that never fully left. The laughter sometimes came with hesitation, an almost imperceptible pause that reminded us of the elephant in the room, Alex's absence, the event that had changed everything. I began to notice how subtle the judgment could be. A comment about trust, a sideways glance during a casual conversation about security at home, even a pause before someone answered the phone, each was a reminder that the past was never really gone. At night, I would lie awake and imagine what it would be like when Alex returned. Would Emily's father smile and hug him as if nothing had happened? Would Mrs. Thompson find it easy to let go, or would the tension resurface? And what about me? I was determined to love Emily and support her family, but I also knew I couldn't pretend that what had happened was insignificant. I struggled with the balance between empathy and honesty, and the fear of saying the wrong thing gnawed at me constantly. Occasionally, I'd try to joke lightly about trivial things, hoping to diffuse the tension, but the humor often fell flat. What I thought might be harmless teasing could be interpreted as insensitivity, as if I didn't understand the weight of what the family had endured. One night, I made an offhand comment about a minor robbery I had read about online, not realizing how close to home it hit Emily's nerves. She shot me a look that stopped me cold, a mixture of warning and hurt that told me, silently but forcefully, that boundaries were not just guidelines, they were the thin walls, holding the family's fragile peace together, living under the same roof. I began to understand the quiet resilience of Emily's parents. Their days were measured, predictable, an exercise in survival and adaptation. They carried the shame with dignity, masking it with routine, politeness, and careful words. And I admired them, even as I sometimes felt trapped in their carefully curated world, a world I had no choice but to inhabit if I wanted to stand beside Emily. The nights were the hardest. The apartment would grow quiet, the noises of the city muted as if the universe itself were holding its breath. I would sit in the living room, alone with my thoughts, replaying every interaction, analyzing each conversation for hidden meanings, for subtle judgments. I would think about Alex, about what his return might mean, about whether the fragile equilibrium we had built would survive his presence. And then there were the dreams haunting, surreal visions of Alex walking through our apartment, the faces of neighbors peering through the windows, whispers echoing in empty hallways. I would wake up in a sweat, heart racing, the sense of foreboding clinging stubbornly to my skin. Through it all, I learned a kind of patience, a discipline in listening and observing, a skill in reading not just words, but the spaces between words. Every small action, every pause, every glance held meaning, and I realized that surviving in this environment was not just about being present, it was about understanding the invisible architecture of family shame and navigating it with as much tact and honesty as I could muster. Sometimes I would catch Emily watching me, her expression unreadable. I knew she sensed my inner struggle, my attempts to balance my own truth with respect for her family. And in those moments, I felt both closer to her and painfully aware of how tenuous our connection could be when confronted with the shadows of the past. Life in that house was a masterclass in human behavior, in restraint, in empathy. I learned to notice the smallest gesture, hesitant sip of coffee, a brief frown, a shift in posture, and to interpret them as messages of unspoken emotion. I became acutely aware that the past does not simply disappear when a person is gone. It lingers, shaping the present, influencing reactions, and quietly dictating the rules of engagement for those who remain. And through it all, I held on to one thought: soon Alex would be back. The world we had carefully managed in his absence would be disrupted, and the question that haunted me every day was simple, yet terrifying. Would our family survive the collision of truth, shame, and loyalty that his return would inevitably bring? The day we learned Alex was being released, the apartment seemed to shift. Even the sunlight streaming through the windows felt different, sharper somehow, highlighting the edges of every object, every shadow. Emily's parents moved with a quiet purpose, as if they were orchestrating a delicate dance, trying to prepare a home for someone whose arrival could either heal or shatter the fragile equilibrium they had maintained. Emily naturally took the lead in planning. She scrolled endlessly on her phone, searching for decorations, catering services, and party themes that would feel light-hearted but welcoming. I hovered behind her, offering suggestions that I thought were playful, harmless, yet I could sense the careful way she weighed every word I said. And then, in a moment that seemed inevitable, the joke slipped out. "Why don't we keep the theme decorator?" I said, smirking, imagining a ridiculous pirate-style decoration theme, a harmless pun on his past. Might suit him perfectly. The air shifted immediately. Emily froze, phone halfway to her face, her eyes wide, not in amusement but in shock. The playful banter I had intended was instantly transformed into a sharp blade, slicing through the cozy atmosphere we had worked so hard to maintain. "Alex is not a thief," she snapped, voice louder than usual, reverberating against the walls of our small apartment. Her face was flushed, eyes burning with a mix of anger and disbelief. I blinked, momentarily stunned. "I'm just joking," I started, but the words felt hollow, inadequate. The joke had landed somewhere dangerous, somewhere I hadn't anticipated, somewhere personal. Her parents looked at me with subtle expressions. Her father's gaze was measured, almost wary, while her mother's lips pressed into a thin line, a quiet admonishment. Even the furniture seemed to lean in, absorbing the tension. I realized, in that moment, how much weight humor could carry. A joke, harmless in my mind, could be a thunderclap in another's reality. And Emily's reality was bound tightly with Alex's past, with the embarrassment of her parents, with the long, lingering judgment of a small town. I tried to clarify, to soften the moment, to step back from the precipice I had unknowingly approached. Emily, come on. I didn't mean anything. It's just he made a mistake, yes, but everyone moves on. We're not making fun of him. She cut me off, hand waving dismissively. It's not funny. You don't get it. You can't just reduce someone's past to a punchline. And she was right. I could see that now. But a part of me, the part that valued honesty above comfort, wanted to point out that what had happened was real. Alex had stolen, been caught, served time. That truth didn't vanish because we were preparing a celebration. The room grew quiet, the kind of silence that fills every corner with tension. I felt a familiar pang of anxiety, a recognition that some lines, once crossed, cannot be easily walked back. I had touched one of those lines with a single, thoughtless phrase. Asterisk, what followed was inevitable. Emily turned her back to me, crossing her arms as if to build a wall I couldn't breach. The room felt smaller suddenly, the space between us charged with unspoken grievances. I can't believe you said that, she muttered, almost to herself. Do you even hear yourself? I hear myself, I said quietly, trying to keep my tone even. I don't know, I wanted to be honest. I didn't mean to upset you, Emily. My words faltered, because I realized honesty alone was not enough. Words could hurt, even if their intent was pure. Her eyes, glistening slightly, met mine. It's not about honesty. It's about respect, about family. You can't just throw someone's mistakes into the spotlight for a laugh. And that was the moment I understood the depth of the conflict. This wasn't just about a joke. This was about loyalty, dignity, shame, and love all tangled together. I felt cornered, caught between my desire to be truthful and my desire to protect the delicate network of feelings surrounding Emily and her family. I wanted to explain, to show her that acknowledging the past did not diminish Alex, did not shame her, did not disrespect our family. But every word I tried seemed to slip through her fingers, misinterpreted, too blunt, too careless. The tension stretched on, hours passing without resolution. We moved through the apartment in silence, each of us performing small tasks, avoiding the other, the air thick with unresolved conflict. I noticed every subtle glance, every small sigh, every faint expression that spoke volumes more than words ever could. I sat alone later that evening, staring at the half-lit kitchen, reflecting on what had just transpired. The joke had been a spark, but the fire was fueled by years of tension, of unspoken truths, of shame and pride intertwined. I realized then that our lives were about to change again, that the fragile equilibrium we had maintained while Alex was away was about to be tested in ways we couldn't yet imagine. And somewhere deep inside, I felt the first stirrings of fear, not just for myself, but for the family I loved. How do you navigate a world where truth and loyalty are constantly at odds? How do you hold on to love when every word you speak can be twisted by history, by pain, by memory? That night, I learned a lesson I would not forget. Family secrets have weight. Humor has power, and even the smallest comment can ripple through lives in ways you cannot predict. The countdown to Alex's return had begun, and with it, the collision of past and present, of honesty and respect, of love and frustration. Asterisk. The day Alex returned felt different from any other day I could remember. The sky was a pale grey, almost washed out, as if the world itself was bracing for something. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, staring at the door, waiting for the moment it would swing open and the balance of our carefully curated lives would shift. Emily was in the living room, adjusting flowers and decorations she had meticulously chosen for the welcome celebration. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic, each placement deliberate, a quiet attempt to control what could not be controlled, the past. I could see her hands tremble slightly. Betraying a nervous excitement she tried to mask with a calm expression, and then the door opened. Alex stepped in, taller than I remembered, with a faint air of confidence and a trace of unease. His presence immediately filled the room, a mixture of familiarity and tension that I could feel pressing against my chest. He smiled, trying to break the silence, but the smiles in the room were tentative, fragile and weighed down by months of absence. Rumors and shame. "Hey, everyone," he said, voice casual, though I could detect a slight tremor, an almost imperceptible sign that he, too, was aware of the delicate dynamics at play. Emily's parents were the first to move. Her father approached with a guarded smile, extending a hand and then hesitating before he embraced Alex. Her mother followed, arms outstretched, but the hug was stiff, careful, as though even the warmth had to be measured and rationed. I remained seated, coffee cup in hand, observing. My mind raced with 1,000 questions. How would he behave? Would he sense the tension? Would he make a misstep that could undo months of fragile peace? Alex glanced at me, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Hey," he said simply, not too loud, not too casual, just enough to acknowledge me without stepping too close into our complicated history. I nodded, forcing a small smile. It was strange, feeling a mix of relief, apprehension, and wariness. On one hand, this was Emily's brother, family, someone I cared about in some distant, complicated way. On the other, he was a man whose past had shaken the foundations of our lives. The apartment, which had felt comfortably small before, now seemed claustrophobic. Every corner, every shadow seemed to hold a memory of his absence. I noticed the subtle shifts in Emily's posture, the way her eyes flickered toward Alex, seeking reassurance, scanning his reactions for signs of normalcy. As Alex moved further inside, I could hear the faint background noises of the neighborhood, the distant hum of traffic, a dog barking somewhere down the street. But in that room, every sound was amplified by the tension, every small movement a potential catalyst for an emotional eruption. He took a tentative step toward the living room, and Emily immediately straightened, a subtle gesture of both pride and anxiety. Her lips pressed together, and I could sense her internal dialogue, balancing relief that her brother was home with the lingering embarrassment of his past. Alex glanced at the decorations, and for a brief moment I thought I saw a flicker of amusement, or was it apprehension? He didn't comment, just gave a small nod, as if acknowledging the effort without crossing any invisible line. I tried to offer him a smile, an attempt to bridge the gap between the past and this present moment. But even as I lifted my hand slightly, my mind screamed 1,000 cautions. Don't joke, don't provoke, don't misstep. Every interaction felt weighted, as though the consequences of a single misread expression could reverberate through the evening, through our relationships, through the fragile trust we had rebuilt. Emily's father cleared his throat and gestured toward the kitchen. "Alex, come, sit. Let's get you something to eat." Alex followed reluctantly, eyes darting briefly toward me. That small glance carried more weight than words. It was an acknowledgement of my presence, a subtle test, a silent measurement of where I stood in the hierarchy of his family, a hierarchy now complicated by the time he had spent away, by the shadow his past cast, by the delicate alliances within the household. As he settled into the chair, I noticed Emily standing a few feet away, arms crossed lightly, a faint tremor in her shoulders. Her lips were pressed tightly together, and I knew she was holding back words she didn't yet know how to say. And I realized, once again, that I was in the eye of a storm. I had not fully anticipated a storm, fueled by history, by shame, by love, and by the fragile hope that this return could bring healing instead of disaster. The conversation started cautiously. Polite exchanges about mundane things, traffic on the way home, the quality of the food we had prepared, a few awkward jokes about local news. But beneath the surface, every word carried subtext, every pause was loaded with meaning. I listened, observing Emily's reactions, gauging Alex's comfort, aware that the first cracks or bridges would form in these small, seemingly trivial interactions. As the evening progressed, I could feel the tension ebbing and flowing, rising in small waves with each glance, each laugh, each carefully chosen word. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that the real test had not yet arrived, not the greetings, not the small talk, but the confrontation with the past, the jokes, the teasing, the subtle truths that would inevitably surface as comfort allowed, as familiarity returned. As the shadows of memory pressed closer, by the time dinner was served, the room had settled into a fragile rhythm. Alex was present, Emily was cautiously calm, her parents were visibly relieved yet still measured, and I remained on the periphery, watching, listening, calculating, bracing for the moment when history and reality would inevitably collide. And I knew, with an uneasy certainty, that nothing would ever truly be the same again. Asterisk. Dinner had begun, but the atmosphere was anything but casual. The table was set meticulously, silverware polished, plates arranged with care, the kind of presentation that spoke more about control than celebration. Emily moved gracefully around the room, ensuring that Alex's favorite dishes were served, while her parents sat stiffly, eyes darting between their son and the space he once occupied in their daily lives. I tried to blend into the background, careful with every movement, aware that even a minor gesture could be misconstrued. I poured wine into glasses, refilled plates, and nodded politely to Alex as he accepted his portion. He smiled briefly, but there was a tension in his shoulders that told me he too felt the invisible weight of judgment pressing down on us all. The conversation started cautiously, polite, almost rehearsed. Emily asked about his time away, the adjustments he had to make, the people he met, but her tone was measured. Her questions were designed to coax him into sharing without forcing him into vulnerability. And Alex responded, equally measured, choosing his words carefully, leaning into neutrality and politeness. I noticed the subtle ways tension manifested, a slight flick of the eyes, a tight jaw, fingers drumming lightly on the table. Even laughter, when it occurred, was carefully modulated. Nothing was spontaneous. Every expression, every sound, every pause carried layers of meaning. I decided to interject lightly, attempting to break the rigidity with humor. "So, Alex," I said, smiling, ready to make amends for all the pranks you might have pulled before you went away. Emily's eyes shot to me, wide with warning. "Don't," she said softly but firmly. I paused, the smile fading, realizing that even a harmless joke was a potential landmine. Alex tilted his head slightly, a faint smirk appearing, perhaps sensing my nervousness, perhaps unsure whether I was serious or teasing. "Pranks?" he asked cautiously, tone neutral, though I detected a hint of amusement. "Yes," I said quickly, choosing my words carefully. "Just, little things. Nothing serious." "It's fine." Emily leaned back slightly, arms crossed, eyes narrowing, silently signaling that she had drawn a boundary I had inadvertently crossed. Her parents exchanged glances, subtle but meaningful, a silent communication that I was treading on thin ice. The rest of dinner passed with measured conversation, but underneath, the tension hummed, constant and insistent. Every joke I attempted, every question I posed, was weighed and considered, met with a guarded response, a raised eyebrow, a slight shift in posture. I realized that the room was a minefield, and each of us was stepping cautiously, trying to navigate invisible boundaries. After dinner, as we moved to the living room for coffee, I noticed Alex glancing at me, curiosity mingled with caution. "You seem different," he said quietly. I smiled, but there was a tightness in my chest. "Trying to survive the family dynamics," I replied lightly, though internally I knew there was more truth to the statement than either of us wanted to admit. Emily shifted beside him, giving me a look that combined warning with frustration. I felt my throat tighten. How could I convey honesty without triggering more conflict? How could I acknowledge the past, our shared history, without causing harm? As the evening continued, small tensions escalated. A comment about a trivial childhood memory sparked a quiet argument about responsibility. A casual remark about neighborhood gossip led to a tense pause, where no one spoke, but everyone felt the pressure of unspoken words. I realized, more acutely than ever, that family dynamics are delicate ecosystems. Each action, each word, each glance carries significance beyond what is apparent. One misstep can unravel weeks of careful negotiation, years of history, and decades of accumulated judgment. I tried to interject gently, to mediate, to smooth over moments of friction. But each attempt was met with subtle resistance, small reminders of the past that could not be ignored. I felt trapped between the desire to be honest and the need to preserve peace. By the end of the evening, the celebration felt less like a joyous reunion and more like a careful dance, each participant aware of the fragility of the atmosphere, each gesture calculated, each word weighed. And yet, despite the tension, there was a shared undercurrent of relief, a recognition that Alex's presence, while fraught with potential conflict, also offered the possibility of healing. As I sat quietly, observing the family, I realized that the real challenge was only beginning. The jokes, the casual remarks, the small boundaries I had already tested, they were all precursors to larger confrontations, ones that would test our patience, our understanding, and our capacity for forgiveness. And deep inside, I understood something crucial. Honesty, humor, loyalty, and love are often at odds within a family. Navigating them requires balance, awareness, and an almost surgical precision in communication. I knew I was not prepared for the full weight of this lesson, but I was about to learn it anyway. The living room, once a place of tentative civility, now felt like a battlefield. Coffee cups trembled slightly in hands, decorative pillows seemed almost accusatory, and the faint tick of the wall clock was amplified into a relentless drumbeat, echoing every unspoken tension. It began innocuously with a casual remark. Alex leaned back, stretching, and said, "You've really kept the place in order. Mum and Dad must be proud." Emily's smile faltered. "Of course," she said tightly, her tone just polite enough to hint that she wasn't amused. I could see her jaw clench, her hands gripping the edge of the couch. I felt a surge of urgency to step in, to ease the subtle friction that was already simmering. "Yeah, we've all done our part," I said lightly. But the moment I spoke, Alex's gaze flicked to me, sharp and measuring, almost challenging. "You mean you, mostly?" he asked, his voice low but deliberate, carrying the weight of months of absence and suspicion. The room went still. Even the faint hum of the street outside seemed to disappear. I swallowed, aware that any misstep now could escalate the tension into outright conflict. "I mean, well, we all contributed. Everyone has their part," I stammered, trying to remain neutral. Emily's eyes narrowed. "Alex, this isn't the time to start implying things," she said sharply. "You've been gone for a year. People did what they could while you were unavailable." The phrase "were unavailable" hung in the air like smoke. Alex's eyes darkened, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, the weight of his presence now fully asserting itself. "I get that," he said finally, his tone careful. "But it feels like some people are judging me even before I've had a chance to settle back in. I'm here, I'm trying, and yet..." He paused, searching the room for understanding. His gaze lingered on me. "Yet some jokes, some comments, make it feel like the past is still alive. Like it's more important than my effort now." A chill ran through me. I knew exactly what he meant. My ill-timed decorator comment had been intended as a joke, a playful attempt to lighten the mood. But the joke now revealed itself as a catalyst for all the underlying resentment, shame, and fear. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she placed her coffee cup on the table. "It wasn't a joke to me," she said, softly but firmly. "It's not about humor. It's about respect, about dignity. And Dad and we felt the sting of shame for a long time. Alex, your choices left a mark that isn't erased overnight." Her father nodded quietly, eyes cast downward, as if to remind Alex and the rest of us that silence carried weight too. I felt the pressure of the room pressing on me from every side. I had to choose my next words carefully. "I didn't mean to disrespect anyone," I said slowly, my voice measured. "I was just trying to lighten the tension. I never meant to hurt anyone or make your return harder than it already is." Alex's gaze softened slightly, but it didn't lose its intensity. "I know," he said quietly, "but it's hard to feel welcomed when every word feels like a judgment. I want to come home. I want to be part of the family again. But I can't ignore the way people look at me, the way they whisper behind my back." Emily's face softened, but a flicker of anger lingered. "We don't whisper. We live with the consequences. We carry the memories of your actions every day. And sometimes, things that seem small to you aren't small to us." The room felt like it was vibrating with tension. I realized, in that moment, how thin the line between truth and empathy could be. I had tried to balance honesty with humor, and the result was a nearly explosive conflict. Every glance, every word, every pause now mattered more than ever. I took a deep breath. "Alex," I said, meeting his eyes, "I'm not trying to attack you. I believe that acknowledging what happened doesn't diminish you. It's part of who you are, and pretending it never happened won't make it easier for any of us." He leaned back, arms crossed, a subtle sigh escaping. "I get that, but there's a difference between acknowledging and mocking. That difference is what's making tonight so difficult." Emily exhaled sharply, and I saw the mix of frustration, love, and fear in her expression. I knew she was caught between protecting her brother and maintaining the fragile peace of our family, and I knew, deep down, that I was in the middle of that storm, struggling to navigate a path that respected both truth and compassion. The confrontation lingered, not with shouting or overt anger, but with the heavy weight of unsaid words, subtle judgments, and simmering emotion. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, and I realized that family reconciliation was never a simple process. It was a negotiation, a careful dance of empathy, honesty, and understanding. And in that moment, as I watched Emily, Alex, and her parents, I understood something fundamental. The past does not simply vanish when a person returns. It exists, quietly, persistently, shaping the present, demanding acknowledgement, and forcing each of us to confront our own expectations, our own judgments, and our own capacity for forgiveness. The room felt impossibly small. The faint hum of the city outside was swallowed by the intensity of the emotions inside. Emily stood rigid, arms crossed, eyes blazing, and Alex's posture mirrored a quiet defiance mixed with apprehension. I felt trapped between them, aware that any word I spoke could tip the balance, ignite an argument, or, conversely, open a bridge toward understanding. "I just don't understand why you'd joke about it," Emily said, her voice cracking slightly, a combination of frustration and hurt. "Do you even realize what that meant to me, to us?" I took a careful breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Emily, I didn't joke to hurt anyone," I said, my voice calm but firm. I was trying to lighten the tension. I thought, maybe humor could make this easier. Alex's eyes flicked between us. "Easier for whom?" he asked quietly but with an edge. Because for me, it felt like the past was being thrown in my face. Like nothing I did in prison or since leaving matters. I felt a pang of guilt, a sharp, twisting feeling in my chest. He was right. My attempt at humor had backfired spectacularly. "I get that," I admitted, lowering my gaze. "I see now that it wasn't funny to you. I misjudged the situation, and I'm sorry." Emily's anger softened slightly, but the tension didn't dissipate completely. "It's not just about you," she said. "It's about respect. About understanding that our family carries things you might not see. That's what I want you to acknowledge, Alex, that your past affected everyone around you." Alex exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. "I know, I've had a lot of time to think about that. I'm here now, trying to make it right. I don't want to fight anymore." A fragile silence fell over the room. Even the clock seemed to pause, marking the significance of the moment. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Relief that some acknowledgement had been made. Anxiety because the peace was temporary, delicate, and could shatter with a single misstep. I spoke again, carefully, my words deliberate. "Alex, we all want to move forward. But moving forward doesn't mean erasing the past. It means facing it together, honestly and with respect. That's all I was trying to do with my comment, in my clumsy way. Emily glanced at me, her expression softening, yet still cautious. Just, please, be mindful, she said quietly. We're trying to build something better here. Don't undermine it with careless words. Alex nodded, a small, tentative smile forming. I understand. I'll try. We all have to. For a moment, it felt like a truce had been reached. A temporary ceasefire in the ongoing battle between history and the present. I could sense the relief in Emily's posture, the cautious hope in Alex's eyes, and even in her parents' subtle nods. There was an acknowledgement that perhaps, slowly, reconciliation was possible. But as I looked around the room, I realized that this peace was fragile, precarious. The past was still there, lurking, and it would require constant effort, empathy, and patience to ensure it didn't resurface in destructive ways. That night, I went to bed with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The confrontation had been intense, raw, and emotionally draining, yet it was necessary. We had spoken truths, aired grievances, and taken the first tentative steps toward healing. And in that quiet moment before sleep, I understood something crucial. Family is a battlefield, not of swords or guns, but of words, actions, and emotions. The scars of the past remain, but with courage, honesty, and understanding, there is a chance to build bridges, to mend hearts, and to create a future where love and respect outweigh shame and resentment. The evening ended without resolution of all issues, but with a sense of cautious hope. We were still a family, flawed but striving, and the journey toward genuine reconciliation had begun. The morning after the confrontation felt heavy. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, yet it did little to lighten the mood. The apartment seemed quieter, almost eerily so, as though every corner was still holding on to the echoes of last night's tension. Emily moved around the kitchen silently, making breakfast with meticulous care. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee, a subtle sign that the emotional storm of the previous evening had left its mark. I watched her from across the room, trying to gauge her mood, trying to find a way to bridge the lingering gap. Alex was in the living room, sitting on the couch with a distant expression. His fingers drummed lightly on the armrest, a rhythmic tapping that spoke of both impatience and reflection. I could see him replaying the previous night in his mind, assessing what was said, what wasn't, and how he should navigate the delicate terrain of our family now. Her parents moved about cautiously, exchanging quiet words that I could barely hear, their expressions a mix of concern and relief. It was clear that even they were trying to process the fallout of the confrontation, attempting to maintain the fragile equilibrium we had all fought to establish. I felt a surge of responsibility. As much as Alex's past had created tension, I knew my own words had contributed to the friction. I wanted to make amends, to show Emily and her family that my intentions were good, that I respected their feelings, and that I was committed to being part of the solution rather than the source of more conflict. Coffee? I asked softly, holding a mug out to Emily. She took it without a word, her eyes briefly meeting mine. There was a flicker of acknowledgement, a tiny bridge forming, but it was tentative, fragile, and required careful nurturing. Alex cleared his throat, breaking the silence. I've been thinking, he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of sincerity, about last night, about what was said. I don't want to dwell on the past, but I also don't want to pretend it didn't happen. I need to earn back your trust, all of you, step by step." Emily nodded slightly, a silent signal that she heard him, that she recognized the effort in his words. Her parents' expressions softened as well, subtle but meaningful, showing that the first seeds of reconciliation were beginning to take root. I felt a cautious sense of hope, but also an awareness that the road ahead would be challenging. Every action, every word, every gesture now carried heightened significance. Missteps could reignite tension instantly, and I knew that patience, empathy, and careful communication would be our most valuable tools. The day unfolded slowly, each of us moving through routines with a heightened consciousness of one another. Conversations were measured, glances were loaded with meaning, and silences were pregnant with unspoken thoughts. Yet, amid the tension, there were small moments of connection, shared smiles over mundane tasks, subtle acknowledgements of effort, a light touch here and there that hinted at the possibility of healing. I reflected on the previous night's confrontation and realized that conflict, while uncomfortable, had a purpose. It had brought hidden emotions to the surface, forced us to confront truths we might have otherwise ignored, and created an opportunity for growth. The challenge now was to navigate these emotions constructively, to transform the raw energy of tension into something positive and sustaining. By evening, the apartment felt marginally lighter. Dinner was quieter, simpler, but infused with a sense of tentative stability. Alex participated more openly, sharing small anecdotes from his time away, while Emily listened, her expressions softening, her tone gentle but firm when necessary. Her parents engaged cautiously, their interactions marked by a careful blend of warmth and restraint. I realized then that reconciliation was not a single event, but a processor, continuous negotiation of respect, honesty, and understanding. And while the path ahead remained uncertain, I felt a growing confidence that, with effort, we could navigate it together, preserving both family bonds and individual dignity. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders, not as a burden, but as a conscious choice. I would strive to support Emily, to respect her family's history, and to be mindful of the delicate balance that had been restored. The road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but it was a journey I was committed to undertaking, for love, for family, and for the fragile peace that we had fought to reclaim. The next morning, the apartment felt deceptively calm. The sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting long shadows across the living room. Yet beneath the surface, tension simmered like a hidden current. Everyone moved with caution, aware that the previous confrontation had left fragile cracks in the foundation of our family's dynamic. Emily was in the kitchen again, meticulously preparing breakfast. Her hands moved almost automatically, but I could see the subtle signs of stress-tight shoulders. A faint tremor in her fingers, the way she exhaled sharply every few seconds. It was clear that while she had temporarily set aside anger, the emotional residue lingered. Alex lingered in the living room, scrolling on his phone, though his attention was split. Occasionally, he glanced toward Emily, then toward me, measuring, calculating. I knew that his mind was replaying the previous evening, evaluating how best to navigate the delicate web of relationships, trying to regain his footing within a family that had been disrupted by his past actions. Her parents moved with a quiet deliberation, exchanging muted words that I could barely hear. There was an underlying tension in their gestures, a constant negotiation between relief that Alex was home and the cautious recognition that the family's equilibrium was still fragile. I took a deep breath, realizing that I too was caught in the middle of a delicate dance. My presence, my words, even my silence, carried weight. Every interaction had to be carefully measured to avoid reigniting the simmering tensions from the night before. "Morning," I said cautiously, keeping my voice neutral. Emily glanced up briefly, eyes flicking toward me, then back to her tasks. "Morning," she replied, tone polite but distant. I sensed the invisible boundary she had erected, a line drawn between us to prevent further conflict. Alex set his phone down and leaned back on the couch. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about how we interact, how we move forward. I don't want to make things worse, but I also don't want to be treated like a ghost from the past." I nodded slowly. "I get that," I said. "We all have to find a way to coexist without letting the past dictate everything. But that requires understanding, patience, and careful communication." Emily finally looked at both of us, her eyes softening slightly but still wary. "It's not just about coexistence. It's about respect for each other, for the family, for what's been lost and what we've endured." The conversation seemed calm on the surface, but beneath it, currents of tension shifted constantly. Every word, every glance, every gesture was loaded with layers of meaning. I could feel the subtle friction building, a reminder that the peace we had achieved was still tentative, fragile, and could easily unravel as the day progressed. Small incidents began to test our equilibrium. A misplaced cup, a casual comment about neighborhood gossip, even the way Alex sat too close to Emily's father on the couch, all became subtle flashpoints. The room was thick with unspoken judgments, careful calculations, and the lingering weight of past mistakes. I realized that tension had a way of finding even the smallest openings, creeping into conversations, coloring interactions, and amplifying minor frustrations. And I knew that the choices I made, the words I spoke, and the gestures I offered or withheld would either diffuse the situation or allow it to escalate by evening. The subtle undercurrent of tension had become almost palpable. Alex, Emily, and her parents moved through the apartment like dancers in a complex choreography, each step precise, deliberate, cautious, and I remained at the center, observing, mediating, measuring, aware that one misstep could shatter the delicate balance we had achieved. I sat quietly, reflecting on the dynamics at play. Family is never simple. Even with love, care, and the best intentions, the ghosts of the past linger. Decisions, jokes, gestures, all carry consequences far beyond their immediate impact. And while reconciliation is possible, it requires vigilance, empathy, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths without letting them destroy the fragile bonds we hold dear. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on my shoulders. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but it was a journey I had chosen, committed to navigating for the sake of love, respect, and the fragile peace that, for now, still existed. The evening descended like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. The apartment, once a safe haven, felt charged with a tension that was almost tangible. Every glance, every subtle gesture, every word spoken carried layers of unspoken meaning and old resentments. It began with a simple remark from Alex, something intended to be casual. "I just don't understand why people keep bringing the past into everything," he said, his voice low but firm. Emily's hands froze, the spatula in her grip trembling slightly. "Because your actions affected all of us," she snapped, her voice echoing in the small apartment. "It's not something we can just forget, Alex. You made choices, and those choices have consequences." I felt a pang of anxiety. I had hoped that careful mediation and cautious communication would prevent such an explosion, but it seemed inevitable. The air was thick with unspoken grievances, pent-up frustration, and the weight of months of tension finally breaking free. "I know," Alex said, his voice rising now, frustration and hurt mingling. "I've spent a year reflecting, paying for my mistakes. I'm trying to come back, to be part of this family, and it feels like nothing I do is enough." Emily's eyes glistened with emotion, anger and love battling in her gaze. "It's not about being enough. It's about respect, about acknowledging the impact your choices had on everyone else. You can't just waltz back into our lives and expect a clean slate." I tried to interject, to mediate, but my words felt inadequate against the force of their emotions. "Emily, Alex, please let's just calm down," I said, keeping my tone measured. "We can talk this through without tearing each other apart." Alex turned to me, eyes blazing. "I'm calm. I've been calm, but it's exhausting to feel like I'm constantly being judged." Her parents watched in silent tension, caught between relief that Alex had returned and fear that the fragile peace could shatter at any moment. Every gesture, every pause was loaded with potential conflict. The smallest misstep, enough to ignite a full-scale argument. The room felt like it was vibrating with pent-up emotion. Voices rose, words clashed, and for a moment it seemed as though the apartment itself could not contain the storm. And yet, amidst the chaos, there was an underlying current of love and desire from everyone involved to reach understanding, to reconcile, to heal. Finally, after what felt like hours compressed into minutes, the room fell silent. Everyone was breathing heavily, emotions raw, eyes searching for the first sign of truce. The explosion had released months of tension, leaving behind a fragile but necessary clarity. The conflicts could no longer be ignored. They had to be addressed honestly, openly, and with courage. After the emotional storm, silence settled over the apartment like a tentative blanket. Emily sat on the couch, head bowed, fingers intertwined. Alex leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a mixture of exhaustion and relief etched into his posture. I remained in the middle, aware that every move now had meaning. "I didn't mean to make this harder," I said quietly. "I just wanted us to face the truth, not to hurt anyone." Emily lifted her gaze, eyes softening, though still wary. "I know, but some truths need to be handled carefully, with awareness of others' feelings. That's what I need from everyone: honesty, yes, but also respect and empathy." Alex exhaled, tension easing slightly. "I understand. I'll be more mindful. I just want to belong here again, and I hope you can see that I'm trying." Her parents exchanged subtle glances, nodding in acknowledgement. The tension was still present, but there was a sense of tentative understanding. A fragile bridge built out of confrontation, honesty, and willingness to listen. I realized then that resolution does not mean perfection. It means creating space for dialogue, allowing emotions to surface, and acknowledging the truth without letting it destroy the bonds of family. The night ended with no grand reconciliations, but with a shared commitment to move forward with awareness, empathy, and the understanding that love sometimes requires patience and courage. As I reflected on the evening, I understood something vital. Family is never simple. It is messy, emotional, and challenging. Mistakes cannot be erased, and words carry weight far beyond their immediate impact. But through confrontation, honesty, and mutual respect, there is the possibility of healing, of growth, and of rebuilding trust. And in that quiet moment, I felt a cautious optimism. The journey would not be easy, the challenges far from over, but the foundation had been laid. We had faced the storm together, and that, perhaps, was the first true step toward lasting reconciliation. The evening descended like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. The apartment, once a safe haven, felt charged with a tension that was almost tangible. Every glance, every subtle gesture, every word spoken carried layers of unspoken meaning and old resentments. It began with a simple remark from Alex, something intended to be casual. "I just don't understand why people keep bringing the past into everything," he said, his voice low but firm. Emily's hands froze, the spatula in her grip trembling slightly. "Because your actions affected all of us," she snapped, her voice echoing in the small apartment. "It's not something we can just forget, Alex. You made choices, and those choices have consequences." I felt a pang of anxiety. I had hoped that careful mediation and cautious communication would prevent such an explosion, but it seemed inevitable. The air was thick with unspoken grievances, pent-up frustration, and the weight of months of tension finally breaking free. "I know," Alex said, his voice rising now, frustration and hurt mingling. "I've spent a year reflecting, paying for my mistakes. I'm trying to come back, to be part of this family, and it feels like nothing I do is enough." Emily's eyes glistened with emotion, anger, and love battling in her gaze. "It's not about being enough. It's about respect, about acknowledging the impact your choices had on everyone else. You can't just waltz back into our lives and expect a clean slate." I tried to interject, to mediate, but my words felt inadequate against the force of their emotions. "Emily, Alex, please, let's just calm down," I said, keeping my tone measured. "We can talk this through without tearing each other apart." Alex turned to me, eyes blazing. "I'm calm. I've been calm. But it's exhausting to feel like I'm constantly being judged." Her parents watched in silent tension, caught between relief that Alex had returned and feared that the fragile peace could shatter at any moment. Every gesture, every pause, was loaded with potential conflict. The smallest misstep, enough to ignite a full-scale argument. The room felt like it was vibrating with pent-up emotion. Voices rose, words clashed, and for a moment, it seemed as though the apartment itself could not contain the storm. And yet, amidst the chaos, there was an underlying current of desire from everyone involved to reach understanding, to reconcile, to heal, finally. After what felt like hours compressed into minutes, the room fell silent. Everyone was breathing heavily, emotions raw, eyes searching for the first sign of truce. The explosion had released months of tension, leaving behind a fragile but necessary clarity. The conflicts could no longer be ignored. They had to be addressed honestly, openly, and with courage. After the emotional storm, silence settled over the apartment like a tentative blanket. Emily sat on the couch, head bowed, fingers intertwined. Alex leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a mixture of exhaustion and relief etched into his posture. I remained in the middle, aware that every move now had meaning. "I didn't mean to make this harder," I said quietly. I just wanted us to face the truth, not to hurt anyone. Emily lifted her gaze, eyes softening, though still wary. I know, but some truths need to be handled carefully, with awareness of others' feelings. That's what I need from everyone, honesty, yes, but also respect and empathy. Alex exhaled, tension easing slightly. I understand. I'll be more mindful. I just want to belong here again, and I hope you can see that I'm trying. Her parents exchanged subtle glances, nodding in acknowledgement. The tension was still present, but there was a sense of tentative understanding. A fragile bridge built out of confrontation, honesty, and willingness to listen. I realized then that resolution does not mean perfection. It means creating space for dialogue, allowing emotions to surface, and acknowledging the truth without letting it destroy the bonds of family. The night ended with no grand reconciliations, but with a shared commitment to move forward with awareness, empathy, and the understanding that love sometimes requires patience and courage. As I reflected on the evening, I understood something vital. Family is never simple. It is messy, emotional, and challenging. Mistakes cannot be erased, and words carry weight far beyond their immediate impact. But through confrontation, honesty, and mutual respect, there is the possibility of healing, of growth, and of rebuilding trust. And in that quiet moment, I felt a cautious optimism. The journey would not be easy, the challenges far from over, but the foundation had been laid. We had faced the storm together, and that, perhaps, was the first true step toward lasting reconciliation. Emily moved around with a newfound ease. Her laughter was more frequent, more natural, though sometimes tinged with memory of past tensions. I watched her, noticing the subtle ways she balanced affection for her brother, loyalty to her parents, and our shared life. She had grown, matured, and learned to navigate her emotions with a careful grace that was both inspiring and humbling. Alex had also changed. The guilt and defensiveness that had colored his early days back home had softened into determination and humility. He contributed without being asked, listened without judgment, and offered small acts of kindness that spoke louder than any apology. Every interaction was a step toward rebuilding trust, a conscious effort to repair the bonds he had once strained. Her parents, once wary and cautious, now engaged with him warmly, though not without maintaining the boundaries earned through difficult experience. Their cautious optimism reflected the balance between hope and realism, hope that the family could heal, and realism that past mistakes cannot be erased. I reflected on my own role in the household, the ill-timed joke, the awkward mediations. The moments of tension had been lessons in empathy, communication, and the fragile power of words. I realized that family is a living, evolving system, where every choice shapes the present and molds the future. One evening, as we gathered in the living room, the air felt lighter. The conversation flowed naturally, jokes were shared without fear, and smiles were genuine. I noticed a subtle shift in unspoken acknowledgement that we had survived the storm and were emerging stronger. I spoke softly, almost to myself, but audible enough for Emily and Alex to hear. It hasn't been easy. None of this has. But we're here, together, and that's what matters. Emily smiled, a warmth in her eyes that conveyed both understanding and forgiveness. Alex nodded, and for the first time, I saw not defensiveness or worry, but a quiet confidence that he belonged here, that we were truly a family again. Her parents, observing from the side, exchanged knowing glances. There was pride, relief, and a shared understanding that the journey of healing is ongoing, but that we had reached a turning point. As the night settled, I realized something essential. Family is not defined by perfection, but by commitment. Commitment to honesty, to respect, to empathy, and to the willingness to navigate storms together. Mistakes, misunderstandings, and conflicts will always arise, but they can also become the catalysts for growth, understanding, and lasting connection. I felt a sense of peace, tempered by awareness. The past could not be erased. The shadows of mistakes would always linger. But through careful, thoughtful action, the bonds we cherish could endure. And in that quiet reflection, I understood the most important truth: love, family, and forgiveness are active choices. Each day presents an opportunity to choose understanding over judgment, patience over frustration, and compassion over resentment. And as long as we choose wisely, the family we are building, flawed, challenged, but resilient, can thrive.